All right, ready to dive in.
Always.
Today, we're all about transplanting clones.
Specifically into cocoa or peat.
Got a whole mountain of sources on cannabis growing. Articles, research, even a couple books.
Gonna pull out the best bits about that one crucial step.
Giving clones their new home?
You know, it's funny, while our sources focus on cannabis, the
Yeah.
transplanting part works for tons of plants.
So even if you're not, like, growing that particular herb.
Still useful stuff here for any young plant, really.
Totally. I'm already thinking maybe tomato clones next. Or, ooh, a cutting garden.
Could do.
But first, why even bother with clones to begin with?
Right, good point. Cloning's basically hitting copy-paste on your favorite plant. Genetically identical.
So instead of seed, you're sure to get
Yeah.
those traits you loved in the parent plant.
Bingo. Huge advantage if you found, say, a tomato that tastes amazing, or a certain cannabis strain with, well, you get the picture.
Makes sense. So clones are ready, new pots waiting. But why is cocoa or peat HE go-to stuff?
Each has its perks. Cocoa's from coconut husks, so renewable, that's good. But mainly it's airy, which means drainage is fantastic. Roots just love it.
Like a perfect fluffy bed for those baby roots.
You got it. Peat moss, now that's more old school. Gardeners have used it forever because it holds moisture so well. Great for plants that like it consistently damp.
But there's that eco side to peat, right?
Yeah.
Harvesting and all.
True. If you go that route, definitely find a sustainably sourced one.
Gotcha. So clones are in their cocoa or whatever. When do we know they're actually ready to be moved?
Timing is key here. Gotta let those clones grow a good root system before the big move to a bigger pot. How do you know? Well, when roots start poking out the bottom drainage holes, that's a sure sign.
It's like they're busting out, ready for more space.
Exactly. And this is where things get delicate. You gotta handle those roots with extreme care. Still fragile at this stage. Any roughhousing,
Uh-oh, what happened?
transplant shock,
Yeah.
sets them back big time.
So how do we move them without, like, traumatizing our little plant babies?
Think of it as delicate surgery. A small trowel or a little garden spade, that's your best friend. Gently loosen the clone from its container in whatever you do.
Yeah.
Disturb that root ball as little as possible.
Less messing with the roots, the better. Got it. So while we're carefully getting the clone out.
Gotta prep their new home, too.
Right. What makes for a good container setup?
Well, first, size matters. Gotta match it to how big that plant's gonna get. Too small, you're transplanting again soon. Too big,
What? Bad stuff happens.
risk overwatering, root rot. No good.
Like Goldilocks. Got to get the pot size just right.
You got it. Then fill her up with your chosen medium. Cocoa, peat, whatever. Make sure it's moist, not sopping wet.
So roots can easily drink, but not drown.
Exactly. Okay, containers prepped, mediums in, now what?
The actual moving in part, I guess.
Yep. Carefully make a hole in the center of that medium, big enough for the root ball, but don't cram it. Don't bend those roots.
Snug fit, but not squished.
You got it. Lower the clone in gently. Top of the root ball should be level with the surface. Backfill with more medium. Make sure all roots are tucked in. Then,
Big reveal.
almost, give that newly moved clone a good, thorough watering. Help settle those roots in. Encourages them to start exploring their new digs.
It's like a welcoming drink after a long trip.
Exactly.
So that's transplanting in a nutshell.
The essence of it, yeah. Of course, there's more nuances, especially when we're talking specifically cannabis.
Ooh, good segue. Let's get into the specifics next time.
So, transplanting in general, we got that down. But with cannabis clones, there's a few extra things to think about.
Like what? They always seemed kind of sensitive to me.
They can be, yeah, more prone to transplant shock than some other plants.
Makes sense. So any tips to, like, minimize that? Make sure our cannabis babies thrive in their new pots.
Big one is the environment you're moving them into. Cannabis, it's picky about its surroundings, especially those first few days after transplanting.
Okay, environment breakdown. What's got to be just right to keep these clones happy?
Light, that's probably number one. They need a lot of it to grow well. But UT, young clones, right after a move, too much light.
Not good.
Can stress them out. Like when you go from a dark room into bright sun, your eyes need a minute.
Got to ease them in.
Exactly. Start with lower light intensity, then gradually increase it over a few days.
Makes sense. What about, like, temperature and humidity?
Crucial, too. Cannabis likes it warm and humid, especially early on. Aim for, say, 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, 60 to 70%.
Like a perfect spring day.
You got it. Now, this is where it gets tricky if you're growing indoors. Keeping those levels steady. Might need some extra tools. Humidifiers, fans,
Maybe a whole grow tent setup.
could be. But doesn't have to be super complicated. Even grouping plants together, that raises humidity a bit. Or a tray of water near a heater.
Little tricks can make a big difference.
Exactly.
Okay, environment's dialed in. Now, food. Nutrients. Do cannabis clones need any special feeding after we transplant them?
Good one. Remember how we said cocoa and peat? They're pretty inert. Don't have much in the way of nutrients themselves.
Right, got to supply that ourselves?
Yep. So how to feed those freshly moved clones? There's two main camps on this.
Oh.
Some folks start fertilizing right away. Others wait a week or two. Let those roots settle in first.
So no hard and fast rule.
Not really. Depends on the strain you're growing, how healthy the clones are to begin with, what kind of fertilizer you're using.
Gotta be a bit flexible. Observe our plants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And picking fertilizers. Tons of options out there, organic, synthetic. Key is find one that's balanced. Gives cannabis what it needs, especially nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium.
The big three, right, for plant growth.
You got it. And as your clones grow up, their needs change. You'll have to adjust the feeding schedule, the nutrient ratios.
It's pretty complex.
It can. That's where understanding plant nutrition comes in. And, of course, paying close attention to your plants. See how they're doing.
Real plant parenting.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, one of our sources mentioned, things that can go wrong after transplant.
Yes. Always good to be prepared.
I'm always nervous about that part. What should we watch out for?
Overwatering, classic rookie mistake. Easy to do with good intentions, but those roots gotta breathe.
All right, too much water, they drown. How do we even know if we're overdoing it?
Look at the leaves. If they're wilting, but the soil's still damp, that's a clue. Seems counterintuitive, but when roots are drowning, they can't actually take up water properly.
So wilting can mean too much water, not too little. Weird.
Yep. Another thing to watch out for is nutrient deficiencies.
Even if we are fertilizing.
Can happen. Could be the pH is off, drainage is bad, or just the wrong mix of nutrients.
It's not just about giving them food. It's got to be the right food at the right time.
Exactly. So how do you know if your clones are missing something? Well, look their leaves again. Color changes, shape changes. Yellowing leaves, often that's nitrogen deficiency. Purple stems could be phosphorus.
Like a whole secret language we got to learn.
Kinda. Once you get it, though, you can adjust your care accordingly.
Good to know.
And there's help out there. Forums online, books, even apps, all about diagnosing plant problems. You're not alone in this.
That's reassuring. Like a whole community of plant nerds out there.
Exactly. And hey, even pros mess up sometimes. It's all part of learning.
True that. Feeling a lot more confident about all this now. Excited to see those clones take off in their new homes.
That's the spirit. Speaking of homes, one of our sources got into how the container itself can actually affect how cannabis grows.
Really? I thought a pot's a pot.
Turns out size, shape, even the material, it all matters. Bigger containers generally, bigger plants, bigger yields, more room for those roots to spread out.
So bigger pot, bigger plant. That's simple enough. What about shape and material? Does that really make a difference?
It can, mostly to do with drainage and aeration, like fabric pots. Those have gotten popular lately. Air circulates really well, helps prevent root rot.
Interesting. So it's not just looks, it's about how well the pot functions for the plant.
Exactly. And there's so many options out there. Clay pots, hydroponics, it's finding what works best for you, your setup, your plants.
Wow, didn't realize there was so much to it.
Yeah.
This is getting complex.
It is. But the more we learn, the more we see how much care and thought goes into growing well. Real dedication from all those growers out there.
For sure. It's not just sticking a plant in dirt and hoping for the best.
Nope. Understanding their needs, giving them the right home, nurturing them along the way.
Brings us to another thing. Training and pruning cannabis.
Yes.
Heard about that, but always seems intimidating. How do you know where to cut, what to leave?
Can be a bit daunting at first, but the idea is pretty simple. You're manipulating how the plant grows to get bigger yields, healthier plants.
Shaping it to do what we want.
Exactly. Lots of techniques out there. Common one is called topping.
Topping.
You literally top the plant, cut the main stem at a certain point while it's still in the vegetative stage. This makes it branch out sideways instead of just growing tall.
So, bushier, not so lanky.
Exactly. More bud sites, potentially bigger harvest.
Topping. Got it. What else is there?
Fimming. Similar, but you just pinch off a bit of the new growth tip, not the whole stem.
What's the difference in the end?
Fimming usually gives you more even branching, a flatter canopy. Good for indoor growing, lets more light hit the plant.
So it's all about making the plant the best shape to soak up that light.
You got it. And there's even fancier stuff, low stress training or LST. You bend the branches, tie them down gently so they grow more sideways.
Like we're sculpting the plant.
In a way, yeah. And the cool thing is not only do you get more yield, but airflow and light penetration improve too. Helps prevent mold, mildew.
So training's not just for looks, it's healthy for the plant too.
Absolutely. Combine that with good pruning, taking off dead leaves, any diseased branches. You're on your way to a thriving cannabis garden.
This is a lot. Transplanting, environment, food, now training. We covered so much.
It is a lot, but it shows how much knowledge, how much care goes into growing these plants well.
Totally. Respect to all the growers out there.
And remember, this was cannabis focused, but a lot of what we talked about, it applies to other plants too.
Right, each one has its needs.
Yeah.
We just got to figure out what they are and give them what they want.
Exactly. And that, I think, is the core of it. It's not just following instructions, it's connecting with nature, feeling that joy of growing things.
We've covered a ton: transplanting, environment, nutrients, even training those plants. But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of growing really great cannabis.
Yeah, it's a deep, deep rabbit hole. So many little details, techniques to learn. But that's part of the fun, isn't it? Always something new to try.
Already got my mind spinning with ideas for my own garden. But before we go, any last bits of wisdom for our listeners?
I think the big takeaway is, yeah, there's general rules, sure. But growing cannabis, heck, growing AY plant, there's no one right way.
Got to pay attention. See what your plants are telling you.
Exactly. Adapt your approach. That's where the magic happens, honestly. It's not just following instructions. It's like building a relationship with these plants.
Understanding their little quirks. What they like, what they don't.
You got it. That's what makes growing so rewarding. It's connecting with nature, nurturing life. Pretty cool when you think about it.
Well said. I think it's time for us to come up for air. Out of this deep dive.
Back to the sunshine.
With a whole new appreciation for how complex plant care can be.
Especially those finicky clones.
From Coco and Pete all the way to training, it's been a journey.
Hope our listeners feel ready to tackle their own transplanting now.
And remember, this is just the start. There's a whole world of plant knowledge out there.
So keep those gardens growing. Keep asking questions. And, as always, happy cultivating, everyone.